And so, good morning everybody. I'm so pleased to be here in Latin America. It's my favorite place in the world where to come and actually meet good friends since we know for many, many years. Thank you for this kind introduction. Actually, I'm a clinician. I deal with the management of people living with HIV since when I was a 24-year junior doctor. And what happened is that years passed, I'm getting old, and my patient as well. And so actually today, I will try to give you my perspective about what is aging in people living with HIV, but contrary to what I usually do, I will try to continue what has been done in the previous beautiful session of this morning, in which really we clinicians try to face something related to public health approach, because we believe that we must inform also public health policies in the future. And so I will start to introduce aging in HIV, but I will also try to see what are the public health perspective in aging. And it's pretty obvious that what we would like to have for our patient, let me say what we would like to have for ourselves, is of course long year to live, but also to give life to the year we live. And so this is what we call the healthy aging. These are my disclosures. Let us start from an epidemiological perspective. This is US Kaiser Permanente Court. You know is one of the largest prospective court in US that inform us about the natural history of HIV, especially in the heart era. And it's pretty interesting to see this story of success. In 2020, actually, the life expectancy of people living with HIV was 22 years lower than what was the general population. And now, most recently, this gap has shortened up to 9 years. Of course, we know this really very much depends on what is the immunological status of people, and this is very much in relation to the nadir CD4. Once again, turning back to the first discussion of this symposium, how it's important to get properly diagnosed at an early stage and avoid the late presentation. Nevertheless, this is a successful story. We hope that in few years, really life expectancy should be the same of the general population. A person gets HIV and he knows he will live as much as an HIV negative individual. Extremely successful story. But go to the clinic, and actually the clinic tell us a different story. The clinic tell us that in the past 20 years, actually, the number of years a person will live with comorbidities, if HIV positive, is not different than was 20 years ago. And so far still, we've got that people with HIV will spend 15 years or less with comorbidities. And so again, are we giving good year of life in people living with HIV, yes or not? Definitely, we need to work on this issue. Given that, well, the issue is comorbidities. This is one of my most quoted paper. It was 2011. At that time, I was comparing the cohort of people living with HIV in the modern HIV metabolic clinic with the general population. And I was able to demonstrate that in people who were 40 years old, actually 40% had comorbidities, and altogether, the more I was getting in a higher age categories, I realized that the number of comorbidities patients living with HIV had were the same to what were expected or what were found actually in HIV negative people 10, 15 years older. At that time, we were the first to introduce this idea of premature age-related comorbidities. There was a big discussion. Is this a measure of accentuated aging? Yes, of course, but does it mean also accelerated aging process? Well, someone says yes, someone says no. Well, the issue is that each individual has got its own trajectory. And there are biological reasons that may explain the fact that aging may go faster in people living with HIV, but still at a clinical level, you need to measure this. And what was interesting is that if I move into a more geriatric population, these are data that I generated in the JEPO cohort. The JEPO cohort is, I put together 15 HIV clinics in Italy with just collecting data from people who are aged more than 65 years. When compared to HIV negative individual, you realize that the chronological age make little value because it's really the number of years you've been living with HIV that drives the proportion of people that will experience multimorbidity, that is at least 3 or more comorbidities above HIV infection, or polypharmacy, that is at least 5 medications on the top of antiretroviral therapy. And so it's clear that age is important, but each year you live with HIV increase you, return you a risk for comorbidities that is higher than your chronological age. And so in order to cover this gap, we know that geriatrician built up a construct. This construct is called the frailty. And actually, frailty is something that informs us on the fact that you may have these two individuals apparently with the same comorbidities. They both have hypertension, hyperlipidemia, and they had a previous myocardial infarction. They are both in the 80s, but the image of the two, I would say the phenotype of the two, is so much different. And so the construct of frailty tells us the reduction of the homeostatic reserves that conceptualize an age-related increase in vulnerability, okay? And this is a measure of biological age. Mind you, this is the construct. Don't miss the construct with the way in which we can measure at a clinical level what is frailty, that is, what is the biological age in my individual. This can be done using a phenotypic definition, or rather using, let us say, the accumulation of deficit, and so building up what we call a frailty index that is able to tell us year by year what is the speed, the acceleration of aging that our patient may develop. And let me quote only this two beautiful paper from the AIDS HIV clinic in the Netherlands, in which actually they demonstrated that looking at the 5 items that describe a frailty phenotype, each of them occur at a higher prevalence in people living with HIV when compared to HIV negative individual per each age categories. And so altogether, we can say that frailty is anticipated in people living with HIV. And so nothing different from what we knew about comorbidities or multimorbidity. But what is more interesting is on the right side. We built the frailty construct because we know that frailty per se is a reversible condition. We need to think which are the tools in order to slow down the frailty trajectories from a fit state to a pre-frail state to a frail state. And what the HIV cohort tell us is that this progression is definitely faster in people living with HIV, and the intervention that we need to use in order to slow down this, it's much more difficult to obtain. And so we are at a clinical level experiencing accelerated aging, higher burden of comorbidities and multimorbidity, higher burden of polypharmacy, but most of all, a higher burden of frailty transition, and all this will produce disability. And so this is the HIV panorama. Let us get to the general population panorama. You know that the biggest epidemic is not HIV, is not COVID, is aging, in fact. And so WHO is trying to think, how can I face the aging epidemic? Because this will be the most difficult and most costly effect in our healthcare system. And so actually we need, first of all, to define what is a successful aging process, what general people says a well-being status. And actually, technically, WHO suggests to use the word functional ability. That is a health-related attribute that enable the people to be and to do what they value. Here we need to introduce that each of us give to life a different value, and I would like to be able at the end of my life still to enjoy my life. In order to do so, there's actually 5 important dimensions that will allow that. This is mobility, this is cognition, this is psychological capacity, this is sensory, that is hearing and visual, and most of all, vitality. Vitality is a metabolic condition that allows me to produce and to spend energy. Well, we know that from a public health approach, these are the items, these are the domain I need to take care of. And so how can I preserve mobility? How can I preserve cognition? Of course, this is what I need to do. And of course, all these variables decline over time, but still, according to the environment where I live, they may allow me to keep a good or no good functional ability. And so I need to study the interaction between 2 factors that allow me to preserve functional ability. On one side, intrinsic capacity. Let me say intrinsic capacity is everything which is below my skin. That is my genetic, that is my lifestyle, that is my comorbidities, that is my stigma. And all this really translate or compare to the environment where I live. And so I still may have some impairment in my intrinsic capacity, but if I live in a good environment, my functional ability will be preserved. And so, okay, I give you 2 pictures, and now I give you 2 documents. The 2 documents is what WHO foresee for the next 10 years. And so how can I drive a decade of healthy aging in the general population? And how can I drive a good health for people living with HIV? And so there has been these 2 documents. I'm a bit surprised because I need to tell you something that is quite sad. And so I work with people in WHO, and I really realized that when they built this 2 documents, one was not aware of the other. Okay, and so actually what I try to do now, and actually I did it practically, this presentation is like the rationale of a paper we are asking, in which really I try to force people that were in the HIV team of WHO to communicate with the people in the WHO that were in charge of the Decade of Aging program. And so, first of all, what is healthy aging? Is the process of developing and maintaining the functional ability that enable well-being in older age. So this is the definition I already told you. And actually, imagine this is a plant that is growing. We want the plant to grow, and this is the functional ability, and really relies on the root, that is the intrinsic capacity, and the soil, which is the environment. Given that, actually, I did an interesting exercise. And so last year, I called several, let us say, opinion leaders in HIV, and I selected them to have at least a 30 years difference. And so I selected some opinion leaders that were my age, older, or much older than me, and younger than me, as well as I interviewed many people living with HIV, and I collected the story. And I realized that there was something that is still largely unaddressed. that is in fact a stigma on the top of the many HIV stigma that we discussed this morning, and it was so interesting, and this stigma is called ageism. Ageism is really the stereotype, that is how we think, the prejudice, how we feel, and the discrimination, that how we act on the basis of aging. And so you can see that if I wanted to describe a healthy aging process that is a functional ability, of course it's expected that functional ability may decline. But the functional ability, I told you, is the net result of intrinsic capacity and environment. And so, first of all, we discussed this morning how difficult it is to manage HIV in different geographical areas. Let me say, treating aging is even more difficult. Because you see, think about this. When we grow up, we are children, well, you go to a pediatrician, and pediatrician will tell you exactly what is expected to be your growth month by month. When you are old, nobody can tell you how will be your aging trajectory, because each of one get old in a different way. That is why it's so much important to be able to collect this data and try to say what the difference of the functional ability trajectory in my population, in my single patient, and why this gap is getting larger if I am HIV positive. Is this because of financial issue? Is because of lack of support? Is because of lack of family members that help me? Is this because of loneliness? And so actually I can tell you that this gap between intrinsic capacity and functional ability is getting wider. The gap was already wide when compared to HIV positive to HIV negative, but as soon as they get older, is getting wider because of ageism. And so the issue is that how can I act against this stigma? We discussed about the stigma in sexual life, we discussed about stigma in HIV testing, but how can I discuss ageism stigma at an institutional level, at an interpersonal level, and how to face this self-ageism? Well, I think there's a lot of things to be done. First of all, I need to rebuild a healthcare system that is targeted for all the people. Let me say my HIV metabolic clinic is an aging clinic now. The median age, people coming in my center, is 60 years. Incredible, 60 years. It means that I've got a tail of distribution up to 85, up to 90. I have in charge a couple of patients who is 100 years old living with HIV. Okay, but look and try to see how my clinic is changing in order to answer this unmet need. But also think that is the interpersonal stigma that is so much important. And to do so, it was so good, this experience that I published, that is making HIV scientists to talk with HIV representatives. And also think that, imagine, in the HIV community, it's so difficult to make people that come from the first experience of fighting stigma in the 90s and what is now. And so all the people, imagine, are saying, oh, you just discuss about U equal U issue, and you don't care about what is the issue of getting into a residential home because you don't have children and nobody is taking care of you, and you don't have money to have someone that is able to help in your disability, staying alone and experiencing loneliness. And so this intergenerational dialogue should be built within HIV community, within HIV doctors. I'm so depressed sometimes. Can I communicate my resident in infectious diseases? What has been my experience in fighting the stigma of HIV, in which we were doing lots of things to try. I look Isabel because actually we shared a lot of this. It was, for us, being a doctor taking care of HIV is not just a clinical issue, it was a political commitment. Okay, and it's still there, it's really still there. And we need really to do this intergenerational dialogue. Given that, okay, WHO says, I want to build a decade of healthy aging and identify 4 pillars. The first pillar is what we already discussed, that is combat ageism. The second pillar is build an age-friendly environment. And there's a 2 pillar that is related to the care, that is how to integrate care and how to have long-term care facilities. And so why I'm thinking about that, I've got so many patients that now are turning to be disabled and don't have children, don't have family support. And so either they have money and I can pay somebody to help them in their home, or they will go in a residential institution. These residential institutions are often very sad places. And every day I receive phone call from doctors in this residential, says, oh, you are making an HIV positive person entering here. You cannot imagine what does it mean. There's a risk for everybody. It says, keep calm, keep calm. Try to understand what we are speaking about. Can we build, let us say, an integrated care and a long-term care for people living with HIV? And so first of all, the document by the WHO says, well, think that we need to reshape the way in which we will take care. In my second talk, I will tell you how I consider this kind of reshape in a patient-centered approach. What does it mean to have a clinic that is patient-centered? But so far, actually, these are the tools that the WHO suggests in order to build a decade of healthy aging. And so, first of all, the first enable is listening diverse voices. And so it means that if I need to know what are the needs, I need to have tools to listen my patient. Listen the patient, listen the community, listen the caregiver, and listen the doctors as well. Okay, the second issue is nurturing leadership and building capacity for integrated action. And so I need to make expert. I need to have patient expert, community expert. I need to be trained myself in order really also to connect various stakeholders. Imagine I've got few people that now I've got Alzheimer's dementia. I've got several people that I've got Parkinson's disease. And so can I build an Alzheimer's clinic for HIV? No, it's impossible. I don't have the number, even if I care a large clinic. Okay, and so the issue is that now I need to get to know in my town what are the facilities for taking care of a person with Alzheimer's disease, and it's the first time I have a dialogue. So far, people living with HIV were cared just by me. Okay, now I need to get more about the community opportunities. And last but not least, I still needed to collect the data. And so try to think, are these pillars something that are unique in people living with HIV? Are there resources that make this pillar an opportunity for people living with HIV? Yes. And so think about the fact that we have an HIV community. Last week I had a 3-day meeting with all representatives of HIV community in Italy and says, what's your role in fighting loneliness that is the effect of ageism? And so is there a new way in which the community can support loneliness? Is a telephone call? Is an activity that you can meet these people? And how can I break down the stigma? The second issue is that if I wanted to have an age-friendly environment, well, what can I do in order to improve the environment, to be friendly for an older person. And so which are the tools, the activities that I can build, thinking that the HIV community exists. And of course, this I will cover in the next talk, how can I really reshape the healthcare model in order to have a dialogue with, of course, the long-term care facilities, and also be able to interact with the many other doctors that will take care of the many comorbidities that will occur because of aging. And so this is my last slide to say, well, WHO suggests a decade of healthy aging. We suggest a decade of healthy aging for people living with HIV. Thank you.